In the spring of 2005, I was notified that I was not going to be returning to the school that I had been working at in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And so, as a family, we looked into our options, and the option that we decided was best for us was to go to a Christian international school in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is the story of our nearly 2-year experience in Brazil. So let's get into it. I'm going to apologize right up front that a lot of this I'm going to have to read off my notes because there's just too much to try to remember in this episode, but I hope that you'll bear with me. So after discovering that I wouldn't be staying in Prince Edward Island, we decided to explore working internationally. And by that time, this was the second school that I had worked at in Prince Edward Island that was associated with the ACSI, which is the Association of Christian Schools International. And I learned that they had tremendous needs in their international schools. And I had been encouraged to consider an overseas assignment. Well, I looked around and I found what looked to be a good fit in a school in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'd always wanted to go to Brazil, loved the warm weather and all that sort of thing. And the school just seemed to be like a really good fit for what I wanted to do and where I was at professionally. And so I applied and was accepted to work at the school in Sao Paulo. But they did encourage us as staff at that school that it would be good to have a supplementary source of income. And so they encouraged us to become missionaries and to work with the mission board and raise support to go to Brazil and be missionaries there. So in the summer of 2005, we spent pretty much the whole summer traveling around to various churches and meeting with people, talking about my expectation of going to Brazil and working at a Christian school there, and to ask for support when it comes to my experience there at that Christian school. And unfortunately, we did not raise a whole lot of support, but we did have a very interesting experience, got to meet a lot of people that we hadn't seen in a long time, traveled around the Maritimes a lot in our car. And of course, this is 2005. I was still very much blue-pilled, and I have a very interesting story about that. When we went to Amherst, Nova Scotia, and spoke at a church there, usually what would happen is they would give me an opportunity to either preach at their church on a Sunday, or else give a short little testimony of what I was doing or something, 5 to 10 minutes. But usually I had the whole message that you want to give at the church. And so I would give some sort of Bible story or whatever, and then also tell them about our experience. And one day after church in Amherst, Nova Scotia, we tried to start up the car and go home, and the car wouldn't go. And so, to make a long story short, we went a little bit, but the car broke down like less than a mile or so from the actual church building. And so we literally walked back and said, hey, look, we got a problem with the car. Can you help us out? Somewhere where we could take it. And at that time they said, oh yeah, we know these people who are really good, and they'll take you over there. So they came. I think they towed the car over, and it wasn't anything serious. So they got the car fixed within a couple of hours. And when it was all said and done, they said, hey, would you like to pay with cash, or would you like to pay with a credit card? And I said, well, what's the difference? And they said, well, if you pay with cash, you don't have to pay the tax. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I said, no, you know what? It's okay. I don't mind paying my taxes. I'll pay you in cash, but give me the amount that I would pay with the taxes. And they just kind of looked at me like, are you crazy? But that's where I was in 2005. I was like, nope, I will pay my taxes even when I don't have to. So yeah, that's kind of where I was in 2005. Well, we didn't end up raising very much support, but as it turns out, we really didn't need to. And we would be very well taken care of in Brazil at the school that we went to. Despite our best efforts, the Brazilian government didn't process my visa until November. So obviously the school year started in September, and so we ended up being a little bit late. We also needed to sell our house in Prince Edward Island, so the plan was that we would go to stay with my wife's brother in Texas while the real estate agent tried to sell the house, much easier to sell when there's nobody living in it, and that we would spend a couple of weeks with my brother-in-law, and then we would end up, going to the school in Brazil for the start of school. Well, because of the delays that happened with the visa processing, our 2-week stay ended up being a full 2-month stay. And I feel bad for my brother-in-law at the time and his wife, because, 5 extra people to feed and all our stuff there, and it was uncomfortable for everybody, but we were in a situation where it was like, well, what do you do? We literally could get the news any day that things were going to finally work out. It wasn't a matter of if, it was just a matter of when. And so we ended up staying there for much, much longer than we expected to. So let me tell you a little bit about Brazil. Brazilians are famous for being beautiful people, to look at anyway. But I can tell you, having lived there, that they are equally beautiful people to interact with. They are fun, but they are also very kind and hardworking people. Brazil itself is the most beautiful country I've ever seen. It is so lush there. It's just, once you get outside the cities, it's just gorgeous, the place. And especially along the ocean, the ride between Rio de Janeiro and Santos. It's just, if you ever have the opportunity, it's breathtaking how beautiful some of those spots along there are. It's crazy how nice it is. But the country itself, I didn't get to see all of it by any means, just a small part of such a big country. But I did get to see quite a bit between Rio de Janeiro and a little to the west of Sao Paulo. And I can tell you, it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful country. The cities, though, I've been to obviously Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Santos, and I can tell you that the cities are not very pretty. They're basically concrete jungles. Sao Paulo in particular is a city of high-rise buildings. I'll show you some pictures here. Just high rises as far as the eye can see. 20 million plus people live there. And it is just, everybody wants to live high up because the higher you are off the ground, the safer you are from being robbed. And so that's kind of the status symbol, is to be able to live high off the ground in these high rises in Sao Paulo. And it's really, it's just not a very beautiful city. There are parts that are beautiful and all that, but as far as the city goes, it wasn't a city that I found very attractive. It was one of those things. As soon as we left the city, it was kind of like, now we're in Brazil, But obviously, it was still Brazil. I did witness that people are. It's pretty rough in Sao Paulo in particular. When we were there, we witnessed people being robbed at gunpoint, like literally right in front of us. We witnessed dead motorcyclists on the street, just lying there dead from accidents or whatever. We witnessed patrols around our local police station because the mafia was literally attacking the police stations because they had put their mafia boss in jail. And so the mafia boss's people were sending a message to the police that you're going to mess with us, we're going to mess with you. And they were afraid. The police were really afraid that they were going to get killed. So Sao Paulo was a pretty dangerous place. There also was a lot of garbage in the streets as people in Sao Paulo commonly dumped their garbage in the street because that's the most likely place that it's going to get taken care of. But it certainly doesn't always get taken care of, and there just seemed to be garbage pile after garbage pile after garbage pile when we were there. It also wasn't uncommon to see stray cows rummaging through the garbage. It was really kind of a strange sight to see these piles of garbage and have a cow literally like with its nose, buried in the pile of garbage. But much more often than seeing cows, you saw hundreds of street dogs that were using these piles of garbage to survive. I saw a lot of mangy dogs, but to my surprise, I never saw a mean street dog. They all seemed to understand that the best part of life came from the generosity of people around them. I'm not sure what happens to the street dogs that bite, but I never saw one to find out. So the street dogs were definitely an interesting part of life in Brazil, but they were not a dangerous part of the life in Brazil. The dangerous dogs were the ones that were always behind the fence. They were the guard dogs, and they were the ones you need to be concerned about. When we finally got to Brazil, I was set up with a nice house and a company car. My children attended the school for free, so our expenses in Brazil were next to nothing. Groceries, gasoline, and our internet connection were our main expenses. The salary was small, but we lived like wealthy people because, again, our expenses were next to nothing. The little bit of missionary money that we got was just icing on the cake. It was like a couple $100 a month. We embraced Brazil as a family, and we assumed that this was going to be our new normal. We all started taking Portuguese lessons, but when we were out as a family, I was expected to do all the talking. I seemed to catch on to Portuguese fairly easily and quickly, and by the time I left, I was able to conduct an interview with a school parent who couldn't speak English, but who understood quite a bit of English. And he spoke to me in Portuguese, and I responded back to him in English. And we were able to have a satisfactory meeting. I was pretty pleased that we didn't need a translator for that meeting. So that was pretty good. So I felt like my Portuguese was doing all right in the short time that I was there. My role at the Christian school in Sao Paulo was the K through 8 principal. The school had a headmaster, an assistant headmaster, a high school principal, and me. So we were the main leadership team. And there was also, of course, a Brazilian, the head of the Brazilian side of things. So for all of the Portuguese, basically she was in charge of all the Brazilian teachers who mostly taught Portuguese. My girls at that time were in grades 5, 7, and 9. The first year we were there. And so we had children at that time in elementary school, middle school, and high school all at the same time. That made for some interesting dynamics for sure. My elementary child had the time of her life in Brazil. She made friends right off the bat, good friends, and had just a wonderful experience for the 2 years we were there. My middle school daughter had an absolutely wretched time. It just couldn't have been much worse. It was one of those situations where it was already middle school, which is tough enough, but then to come to an international school where everybody kind of knows you're probably not going to stay around here long. A lot of people come for a year or 2 years and then leave. And so it was kind of like, why would I become friends with you when I know you're just going to leave in a year or two? So, which of course ended up happening. We did end up leaving in 2 years. So she kind of got shut out from making friends, and it was just a really tough time for her. My high school daughter was somewhere in the middle. She didn't have a great experience, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the middle school daughter's experience. So she was somewhere in between. The school was very well run, definitely the best school of the 3 that I worked at. It was very nice to have the opportunity to focus my attention on the education at the school and trying to be there for the teachers rather than having to spend so much of my time worrying about the finances of the school. So the headmaster and the assistant headmaster, that was their job, was to make sure that the school ran smoothly as far as the finances and all of those other things that you never think about when you think about a school. They handled all that, and the high school principal handled the academic side of the high school, and I ran the academic side of everything else from grade 8 and down. And I really liked that. I got to know the teachers really well, got to spend a lot of time in the classrooms, watching the teachers, helping them, seeing the kids, getting to know the kids, spending time in the playground with the children and all that sort of thing. It was really a nice experience for me. While we were there, we also attended an English-speaking church where most of the school staff went, because all of the teachers that didn't teach Portuguese, they all had to be from North America. So they were all either Canadian or mostly American people, because they wanted to get the true, authentic English-speaking experience at the school. And also, you had to be a Christian who went to church kind of thing in order to teach there at that Christian school. I got to see the clash between cultures, and it was especially eye-opening for me to realize how much of my Christian upbringing was purely cultural rather than spiritual. When Brazilians who spoke a little bit of English would attend this church, usually because they wanted to improve their English, you could see that they felt really out of place. Only the Brazilians who had been coming to that church for years and who had embraced Western culture there had actually fit in at that church. Most of the times you would see these Brazilians come in and they're just kind of like, I don't know if because they were used to the Catholic Church and this was very much more free, that type of thing. But it never ceased to amaze me at how lost any of the Brazilians felt when they came to this church. As technical missionaries, we were exposed to the side of missionary work that we had only ever heard about when we lived in Canada and the United States. We rubbed shoulders often with missionaries, and we came to understand that missionary work was either a huge sacrifice or it was like an extended paid vacation. There were some missionaries there who were toiling away, doing great work, working hard and doing what they thought was God's work and barely making ends meet, mostly because they were giving to the poor and helping other people as much as they could. But on the other hand, most of the missionaries who had their children at the school, at least, they were living the high life in Brazil. Like, they were really, really living well. They saw that mission work was basically a public relations stunt, and that if they said the right things to the right people back home, they could live like kings in Brazil. Obviously, I have no interest in naming names, but after what I saw in Sao Paulo, I would have a very hard time giving money to any missionary trying to raise money to return or to continue on the mission field. I just saw too much abuse. To give you an idea of what it's like, think about how political fundraising is conducted in the United States, and you have an idea of what goes on with missionary support. It was definitely an eye-opener, for sure. As disillusioned as I became with the whole business of missionary support, I was incredibly impressed with the substance of the Latina women in Brazil. As a married man, I didn't pay too much attention at first to the Brazilian women all around me, but because of my role at the school, I got to know some of the Brazilian teaching staff, and I was blown away by how feminine yet resilient these women were. I couldn't help but find myself drawn to what it was about these Latinas that made them so different from the women back in North America. They were passionate about life, and they were passionate about their men. I remember distinctly thinking that if I ever got the opportunity to love another woman, I would like to explore the possibility of being with a Latina. And little did I know at that time how significant that idea would later become. I have many little stories from Brazil that may find their way into other subjects that I talk about in the future. But the main takeaway from Brazil was the fact that we only ended up staying for 2 school years. The plan was to commit to 6 years, which would have put our youngest at her high school graduation year. But we hadn't even been in Brazil for a full 12 months before we realized that we wouldn't be staying beyond our initial 2-year commitment. It officially started with the headmaster calling me into his office to let me know that they would like to extend our contract for another 2 or 3 years. They seemed genuinely pleased with my performance, and since finding staff from the USA and Canada to come and work in Brazil is not an easy sell, it made a lot of sense to try to lock me up as quickly as possible for a second term. Had it not been for the fact that there was a choice between the 2-year and the 3-year option, I might have signed the document and handed it in right then and there. After all, we had already discussed that our plan was to stay for 6 years and then consider our options. But it was a Friday afternoon, and I told the headmaster that I would like to talk the matter over with my wife and get back to him with our decision on whether 2 years or 3 would be our selection on Monday. He, of course, thought that was a great idea, and I left his office with that as the plan. When I got home, I showed the document to my wife, and she nearly cried, saying that she was convinced that God did not want us to renew our contract in Brazil at all, and that we needed to return to Canada after our 2-year contract was up. I was shocked. I knew that our middle child was struggling hard in middle school, but I reasoned that that could happen at any school, junior high girls being junior high girls and all, but she assured me that it had very little to do with that. She told me that in her prayers, she was hearing the voice of God telling her that we were not supposed to stay in Brazil any longer than necessary. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I had to admit that I had only found out about this offer that day and that I had not prayed about whether or not our plan to stay 6 years was confirmed or not. I promised my wife that I would pray about the matter and that I would give it the weekend for God to speak to me about it. I was convinced that if God was truly speaking to my wife, that he would share a similar message with me. Well, I prayed all right, and it was as if I had flipped a switch. In the period between Friday afternoon and Monday morning, there were several unmistakable signs from God that we were not supposed to stay in Brazil. The 2 most obvious signs came from my missionary board and from my brother. I received an email from the mission board that weekend stating that not only would we no longer be funded our small amount each month, but that since a couple of supporters who said they would support us monthly decided not to follow through with that commitment, the board realized that they had been sending us money that wasn't actually coming in. Not only would financial support stop immediately, but they claimed that we actually owed them money and that we needed to pay them back right away. We really didn't need the money from Canada, but being told that we owed them money due to their lack of oversight on the accounts did not sit too well. I have 2 younger brothers. The older of the 2 is the lead pastor of a church in Ontario that he helped start from nothing. I had been recruited numerous times to join the pastoral team there, but I had never felt called to being a part of that team. I decided to call my brother that weekend to ask him if they were still in need of my help if I decided not to continue with another contract in Brazil. While I wasn't surprised to hear them say that they wanted me to come, he told me that my call was a specific answer to their prayers. Recently, the church had been growing a lot, and the need for services beyond the message from the stage were growing out of control. It was becoming a regular occurrence that on Sunday morning, my brother would get a call from a volunteer at the church saying that they were sick or that they couldn't come in and asking to have somebody replace them at the last minute. Administration is not my brother's forte, and Sunday morning had become a time of tremendous stress for my brother. It was obvious that they needed a staff member to oversee all of the programs that didn't take place on the stage. When they prayed and asked who that individual was, they said that my name came up as the only option. I was told that not only was there a job waiting for me if I wanted it, but that it might actually save my brother's mental health in doing so. There were several other confirmations that weekend which made it abundantly clear that we could not renew our contract in Brazil. However, these 2 events that I just mentioned were the ones that really stood out. Suffice it to say, God made it very clear to me that what he had been telling my wife was true for me as well. I went back to the headmaster on Monday and I told him what happened. And I told him that I would not be able to renew the contract at all, much to my disappointment. After my experience in PEI, I was really enjoying both Brazil and the school where I was working. Things were very calm and pleasant there, despite the fact that we lived in a very dangerous section of a very dangerous city. The headmaster was visibly upset with my news, and he told me that they were looking forward to having me take a bigger role on the leadership team in the near future at the school. What he meant by that was that he had already made plans to retire from his position at the school and take a role back in the USA with the association the school was affiliated with. To make things worse, the principal of the high school had also decided at the same time that he would not be returning either, which left the headmaster's assistant as the last man standing. All three of us had come to these decisions independently, and in the end, it worked out fine for the school as there were a couple of teachers who were ready and eager to take a step up into leadership roles, and I'm sure that they did an admirable job in our absence. If memory serves me correctly, the offer to renew came in May of 2006, but my contract didn't end until June 2007. While it's not quite the same thing as being a lame duck president, there are definitely some similarities when your teachers know that they will be there long after you're gone. I made the best of the second year that I had there, and I was truly sad to say goodbye when I left. Brazil had been an amazing experience for me in too many ways to list. I had grown up a lot there. My eyes had been opened to many stereotypes and rumors that were not true. Indeed, I would say that if anything, Brazil was a huge shot of wisdom for me. With the knowledge that the second year of my contract would be my last in Brazil, I really focused on the curriculum and trying my best to support the teachers that worked under me in that second year. I had now been working in schools for almost 10 years, and I was starting to see that it really didn't matter much that I was working for a private school. I saw that the school system as a whole does not serve children well. Having grown up through the public school system, I already knew that public schools were part of the problem of society. But as private schools, we supposedly had an opportunity to do things better. And they were better, but not in the ways that really mattered. Regardless of whether you send your children to public or private schools, the parents have been trained to believe that a good, secure future comes from getting a university education. Therefore, all schools need to cater to what the universities want, eliminating the freedom to teach the students what they really need to know. Parents are always going to want to get an advantage for their children over other children for spots at the best universities. I had many opportunities to talk to my peers about our curriculum, but it was made clear that there was no interest in changing anything, as it would ultimately be bad for business. Although the need for private school administrative staff is intense, I have not felt drawn at all to go back to working at schools. To do so for me would be to perpetuate the problem, rather than to be part of the solution. In the summer of 2007, I said my final goodbyes to Brazil with a feast at a Brazilian steakhouse, and I returned to Canada for my next adventure, working at a church.